scariest job you can imagine. For our storyteller, Mark, it was a graveyard security gig. He didn't believe in ghosts until the graveyard started believing in him. Get ready for a first-hand account of chilling encounters in the silent city of Iron Gate Cemetery. From unexplained sights to sounds that'll crawl under your skin, this story will make you think twice about what lies beneath the headstones. Buckle up, this is going to be a dark ride.
The chipped ceramic mug warmed my hands, a pathetic attempt to ward off the October chill that seeped into the cemetery office. Coffee, black and bitter, was my only ally here at Iron Gates Cemetery. It was a far cry from the bustling campus of Umber College, a far cry from my dorm room, a far cry from anything resembling a normal college experience. But rent was due and ramen wasn't going to pay for itself. Hence, grave shift. I am Mark. I was a fresh-faced 19-year-old, armed with a hefty dose of skepticism and a graveyard attendant uniform that smelled vaguely of mothballs and despair. I didn't believe in ghosts, ghouls, or anything that went bump in the night. I was a pragmatic, rational guy, the kind who aced science exams and scoffed at ghost hunting shows. This job was just a means to an end, a temporary detour on the road to my engineering degree. The cemetery itself was sprawling, a silent city of granite and marble stretching across rolling hills. During the day it was peaceful, almost serene. But at night it was different. The shadows stretched long and distorted under the sickly yellow glow of the security lights, turning familiar monuments into menacing figures. The wind whispered through the trees, sounding like mournful sighs, and the silence was so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on you. My duties were simple. Patrol the grounds, ensure no vandals were desecrating the graves, and generally keep an eye on things. Mr. Abernathy, the cemetery director, a man who looked like he'd been embalmed himself, had warned me about trespassers, teenagers looking for thrills, and the occasional drunk. He hadn't mentioned anything about ghosts. The first week was uneventful. I walked the perimeter, checked the gates, and spent most of my time in the office, buried in textbooks, the hum of the security cameras my only companion. I even started to find a strange sort of peace in the solitude. Then things started to get weird. It began subtly, a flickering light in the distance that I couldn't find the source of, a feeling of being watched when I knew I was alone, the distinct scent of lilies, even though the nearest lilies were a good 100 yards away. I chalked it up to overactive imagination, stress, and the general creepiness of the place. But then came the mausoleum. The Omega Mausoleum was the grandest structure in the entire cemetery, a hulking edifice of black granite. It looked more like a fortress than a final resting place. The Darlington family, according to the inscription above the massive bronze doors, had been prominent figures in the town's history, their wealth and influence echoing even in death. I was doing my rounds on Thursday night, the air thick with fog that clung to the ground like spectral fingers. As I passed the Omega Mausoleum, I paused. Something felt off. The fog swirled around the structure, obscuring its edges, making it seem even more imposing. I shone my flashlight on the heavy bronze doors, checking for any signs of tampering. They were locked, as always. The Darlingtons, it seemed, were intent on keeping their eternal slumber private. But then I saw it. In the gap between the doors, a sliver of darkness, something moved. I squinted, thinking it was just a trick of the light, a reflection. But then I saw them. Eyes. Two luminous points of light, burning with an unnatural intensity, were staring back at me from the darkness within the mausoleum. They were unmistakably eyes, large and round, and filled with an intelligence that sent a shiver down my spine. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. My flashlight beam trembled in my hand as I stared back at those eyes, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. It had to be an animal, a cat maybe, that had somehow gotten inside. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely a whisper. The eyes didn't blink. They didn't move. They just stared. I took a tentative step forward, my hand instinctively reaching for the heavy wrench I carried for. Well, I wasn't really sure what I carried it for. Protection, I guess. As I moved closer, the eyes seemed to intensify, burning brighter, boring into me. I felt a wave of cold wash over me, a bone-chilling cold that had nothing to do with the night air. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they were gone. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my flashlight beam dancing over the locked doors, the swirling fog, the silent monuments. There was nothing, just the cold, the silence, and the lingering feeling of being watched. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. I wanted to dismiss it, to tell myself it was a hallucination, a trick of the light, anything but what it seemed to be. But I knew what I had seen. I had seen eyes, burning eyes, peering out from behind the locked doors of the Omega Mausoleum. That night, every creak of the old office building, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sent jolts of fear through me. I reread my physics textbook, clinging to the familiar equations, trying to drown out the image of those eyes. The next few nights were a blur of paranoia and exhaustion. I avoided the Omega Mausoleum, taking longer routes, sticking to the well-lit paths. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Shadows seemed to lengthen and twist, whispers seemed to follow me on the wind, and the cemetery seemed to grow darker, more malevolent. Then, on Saturday night, it happened again. I was patrolling the north end of the cemetery, near the older section where the tombstones were weathered and crumbling. The fog was even thicker than before, reducing visibility to a few feet. I was about to turn back when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping sound. It was coming from somewhere nearby, but the fog made it impossible to pinpoint its location. I stopped, listening intently, my flashlight beam cutting through the swirling mist. The sound was faint, almost lost in the thick silence of the fog, but it was undeniably there, rhythmic, deliberate, not the random clatter of a branch or the skittering of a small animal. My hand tightened on the flashlight. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, to bolt back to the flimsy safety of the office, but some morbid curiosity, or perhaps just sheer stubbornness, held me rooted to the spot. "Hello!" I called out again, louder this time, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. The fog swallowed the sound instantly. It didn't stop. It didn't acknowledge me. It just continued, steady and unnerving. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere low to the ground, maybe from behind one of the larger, older stones. I started walking slowly towards the sound, my boots muffled by the damp grass. The fog pressed in on me, a suffocating curtain that turned the familiar shapes of headstones and angels into monstrous, indistinct forms. Each step was heavy, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig underfoot making me jump. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was ridiculous. It had to be something mundane. A loose plaque flapping in the wind? Someone working late, at midnight, in this fog? Closer now. The sound seemed to emanate from a cluster of particularly old graves, marked by stones blackened with age and tilting at precarious angles. The air here felt colder, heavier, carrying that same faint scent of lilies I'd noticed before, a sickly sweet smell that felt utterly out of place. I raised my flashlight, the beam weak and diffused by the fog. It danced over weathered inscriptions, names long forgotten, dates stretching back over a century. It was coming from there, behind that crumbling granite obelisk, almost swallowed by ivy and mist. I crept closer, my breath held tight in my chest. I could almost feel the sound now, vibrating subtly through the damp earth. I rounded the obelisk, flashlight fixed on the ground, and I saw it. Not a branch, not a plaque. Resting on the flat, moss-covered top of a low, rectangular tomb was a hand. It was unnaturally pale, almost translucent, bone-thin fingers curled slightly. And one of those fingers, the index finger, was gently, methodically tapping on the stone. My blood ran cold, colder than the air, colder than the grave it rested on. The hand wasn't attached to an arm I could see. It seemed to emerge from the swirling fog around the tombstone, as if the fog itself was condensed bone and flesh. I stood there, frozen, staring at the tapping hand. It was real. It wasn't a trick of the light, wasn't a hallucination. It was a hand, disconnected, tapping with an eerie, slow precision on a grave. My mind reeled. This was impossible. This defied everything I knew about the world, about death, about reality. My pragmatic, rational brain screamed for an explanation, for a hidden body, a prosthetic, anything that made sense. But the sight before me offered none. The hand was simply there, tapping. Then, as if sensing my presence, the tapping stopped. The hand paused, fingers uncurling slightly. Slowly, eerily, it began to turn on the stone, the pale palm facing upwards. It wasn't turning from a wrist. The whole hand seemed to pivot independently, like a strange, detached crab. My flashlight beam wavered, my hand shaking violently now. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet felt cemented to the ground. As the hand completed its turn, the fingers began to curl back inwards, slowly, deliberately, until the knuckles were pressed against the stone. It wasn't tapping anymore. It was pressing down as if trying to push through the granite. A low, scraping sound reached my ears, faint beneath the fog, like fingernails dragging on rock. That was it. That broke the spell of fear that held me. The scraping sound, the sheer wrongness of it, snapped me out of my trance. With a guttural yell, I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I ran blindly through the fog, stumbling over uneven ground, crashing into unseen headstones. My only thought to get away, to put distance between myself and that tapping, scraping horror. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop until the faint, hazy glow of the office lights became visible through the mist. I burst through the office door, slamming it shut behind me and fumbling with the lock, my hands trembling so badly I could barely grasp the bolt. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, the image of that pale, detached hand etched into my mind. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my chair, the office lights blazing, jumping at every shadow, every sound. The coffee mug sat forgotten on the desk, cold and untouched. My textbooks lay ignored. How could I possibly focus on thermodynamics when I had just seen something that defied every law of physics I knew? I stared at the clock, watching the minutes crawl by, waiting for the first hint of dawn, for the blessed arrival of Mr. Abernathy, for anything that would break the terrifying solitude of the night. When Mr. Abernathy finally arrived, looking surprisingly chipper for someone who dealt with the dead all day, he found me pale, wide-eyed, and shaking. "Rough night, Mark?" he asked, his voice reedy. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to spill everything: the eyes in the mausoleum, the tapping hand, the feeling of being watched. But how? How could I explain it without sounding completely insane? Who would believe that a disembodied hand was tapping on a grave in Section D? Just the fog, I stammered, rubbing my face. Made things creepy. He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Ah, the fog. Gets to you sometimes. Makes the old place feel even older. He glanced around the office, his eyes lingering for a moment on the security camera monitors before turning back to me. Well, you're off the hook. Try to get some rest. I nodded, grabbed my jacket, and practically fled the office, the morning air doing little to dispel the chill that had settled deep in my bones. The next few days were a blur of sleeplessness and anxiety. I went to classes, tried to study, but my mind kept replaying the events of that night. The eyes, the hand, the silence that wasn't silent. I tried to rationalize it, desperate for a scientific explanation. The eyes? Maybe a reflection, or some nocturnal animal with particularly reflective eyes. The hand? A prank? Someone had planted a fake hand, maybe on a stick, and was hiding in the fog? But the way it turned, the scraping, it felt too real, too organic, despite being detached. I even considered going back to Section D during the day in the sunlight to search for any sign of the hand, any prank device. But the thought filled me with such dread that I couldn't bring myself to do it. The cemetery in the daylight felt different, but not safe. It felt like the horrors of the night were merely dormant, waiting for darkness to reclaim their domain. My skepticism was eroding, replaced by a gnawing, insidious fear. I was no longer scoffing at ghost stories. I was starting to live one. My next shift was scheduled for Tuesday night. As the time approached, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Going back felt like walking into a trap, like willingly stepping back into the unknown horror that lurked among the headstones. But I needed the money, and part of me, the terrified, morbid part, felt compelled to return, to see if it was still there, to see if it would happen again. Tuesday night arrived, starless and just as cold as the others. The fog wasn't as thick, but the air was heavy, expectant. I brewed the bitter coffee, the familiar smell doing little to comfort me. The office felt smaller, the silence louder. Every shadow outside the windows seemed to shift. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper calling my name. I knew I had to do my rounds. Staying in the office felt safer, but Mr. Abernathy checked the patrol log. Besides, the fear of what might be outside was almost preferable to the fear of what might try to get in. I grabbed my flashlight and the heavy wrench, trying to project a bravado I didn't possess. Stepping outside was like entering a different world. The cemetery at night was no longer just a workplace. It was a hunting ground, and I felt like the prey. I started with the west section, the furthest from the Omega Mausoleum and Section D. My flashlight beam swept nervously over the stones, my eyes darting into the deeper shadows. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It felt like a tangible pressure on my back, like cold eyes drilling into my skull. I walked faster than usual, my patrol route becoming a hurried march. Every distant sound, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the creak of an old tree, sent jolts of adrenaline through me. I kept expecting to see the tapping hand again, or those burning eyes, or something even worse. As I approached the center of the cemetery, near the large oak tree that marked the oldest part of the grounds, I heard a sound that made me stop dead in my tracks. It wasn't tapping this time. It was weeping. Low, mournful sobs, carried faintly on the wind. They were coming from the base of the ancient oak tree. My heart leaped into my throat. This was new, and in a strange way, more terrifying than the disembodied hand or the eyes. Felt human, or like something that used to be human. Hesitantly, I raised my flashlight and pointed it towards the tree. The light fell upon a figure huddled at the base of the massive trunk. It was a woman, or what looked like a woman, dressed in a long, dark, old-fashioned gown. Her body shook with silent sobs, her face buried in her hands. Her hair was long and dark, cascading over her shoulders. My first thought was that it was one of those thrill-seeking teenagers Mr. Abernathy had warned me about. But something felt wrong. The stillness of her posture, the way she seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, the sheer despair that radiated from her. It didn't feel like a living person. My rational brain fought back one last desperate time. Maybe she was a mourner, someone visiting a grave late at night, overcome with grief. Unlikely, but possible. I had to check, didn't I? It was my job. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Are you all right?" "The cemetery is closed." The weeping stopped abruptly. Slowly, the figure began to raise her head. My flashlight beam was fixed on her. As her face lifted, the light illuminated her features. She was young, beautiful even, but her skin was impossibly pale, almost translucent, like the hand I had seen. Her eyes were wide and dark, filled with an ancient sorrow. Tears streamed down her face, reflecting the faint light like liquid silver. But the most terrifying thing was her expression. It wasn't just sadness. It was a profound, soul-deep anguish, coupled with a chilling, vacant stare that seemed to look right through me. And then her lips parted. She didn't speak. Instead, a sound emerged from her throat, a low, keening wail that seemed to vibrate in the very air around me. A sound of pure, unadulterated grief and despair. It was the most heartbreaking and the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. It felt like the earth itself was weeping. And as the wail echoed through the silent city of the dead, her eyes locked onto mine, and I saw it. Behind the sorrow, a flicker of something else. Something cold. Something hungry. It wasn't just sorrow. It was a trap. I didn't wait to see what she would do next. The keening wail was the sound that finally broke my nerve completely. I spun around and ran, harder and faster than I had run from the tapping hand. I ran from the weeping woman, from the feeling of cold eyes watching me, from the impossible horrors that were slowly but surely revealing themselves in Iron Gate Cemetery. I ran back towards the office, towards the flimsy hope of safety behind a locked door, knowing with a chilling certainty that this night was far from over, and that whatever was in the cemetery with me, it saw me, and it was interested. I didn't stop running until I slammed the office door shut, the flimsy lock clicking into place with a pathetic finality. The keening wail still echoed in my ears, a phantom sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I leaned against the door, gasping for air, my eyes darting around the small room, half expecting the pale woman to materialize before me. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh, sterile glow that did little to dispel the darkness that had invaded my mind. The familiar clutter of Mr. Abernathy's desk, the half-eaten sandwich, the stack of interment records, the ceramic cat figurine, usually offered a small sense of normalcy. Tonight, they felt alien, disconnected from the terror I had just experienced. I sank into my chair, my legs trembling uncontrollably. The coffee mug, still cold from the previous night, sat accusingly on the desk. I didn't dare touch it. I didn't dare move. I just sat there, listening, straining to hear anything over the frantic pounding of my own heart. The silence of the cemetery pressed in again, but it was a different silence now. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a heavy, expectant silence, like the world holding its breath. I imagined the weeping woman still standing beneath the ancient oak, her sorrowful wail hanging in the misty air, perhaps even drifting towards the office. Hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. The first hint of dawn was a pale, watery light that seeped through the office window, a fragile promise of the sun. When Mr. Abernathy arrived, his usual cheerful greeting died on his lips as he took in my disheveled appearance and the haunted look in my eyes. "Mark? What in heaven's name?" This time I couldn't hold it in. The words tumbled out of me in a rush, a jumbled account of the eyes in the mausoleum, the tapping hand, the weeping woman beneath the oak. I recounted every detail, every chilling sensation, the cold dread that had gripped me. Mr. Abernathy listened, his expression shifting from mild concern to a bewildered frown. When I finally finished, breathless and trembling, he was silent for a long moment. "Mark," he said slowly, his voice gentle. You've had a rough few nights. The cemetery, it can play tricks on your mind, especially in the fog. But I saw them. I insisted, my voice rising in desperation. I saw the eyes, the hand, the woman. She was crying, Mr. Abernathy. I heard her. He sighed, running a hand over his thinning hair. Mark, I've worked here for 20 years. I've heard stories, of course, old wives' tales, but I've never seen anything. He held up a hand, his gaze surprisingly firm. Look, I understand you're shaken. Why don't you take the night off? Get some rest. We can talk about this later. I knew he didn't believe me. He thought I was stressed, maybe even hallucinating. But I knew what I had seen. The memory was too vivid, too real. That day, I didn't go to classes. I stayed in my dorm room, the blinds drawn, the familiar sounds of campus life a distant hum. Sleep eluded me. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking presence. Every creak of the old building sounded like a mournful sob. I knew I couldn't go back to the cemetery, not after what I had seen. But the thought of facing Mr. Abernathy, of explaining why I couldn't continue, filled me with a different kind of dread. I needed the money. I needed the job. That evening, as dusk began to settle over the town, I made a decision. I wouldn't quit, not yet, but I wouldn't patrol the grounds alone again. Armed with my physics textbooks, a flashlight, and a healthy dose of fear-induced adrenaline, I returned to Iron Gate Cemetery. The night was calm, the sky clear, a stark contrast to the fog-laden horrors of the past week. I stayed in the office, the security monitors my only companions. I tried to study, to lose myself in the familiar equations, but my eyes kept drifting to the screens, scanning the silent rows of headstones, the dark shapes of the mausoleums. Nothing happened that night, or the next. The cemetery remained quiet, peaceful, almost mocking in its normalcy. I started to doubt myself. Had it all been a trick of the light, a product of stress and an overactive imagination? But the memory of the tapping hand, the sorrowful wail, remained, a cold knot of fear in my gut. Then, on Friday night, a week after the weeping woman, I saw something else on the security monitor. It was in Section D, the older part of the cemetery. The camera feed was grainy, the infrared light casting an eerie green glow over the tombstones. At first, I thought it was just the wind, rustling the leaves of the overgrown ivy. But then I saw it again, a flicker of movement near the crumbling obelisk where I had seen the hand. Something pale, indistinct, seemed to be shifting in the shadows. I leaned closer to the monitor, my heart pounding. It was small, low to the ground, too small to be a person. It moved slowly, erratically, disappearing behind one headstone and reappearing behind another. It looked like something crawling. My breath hitched in my throat. I zoomed in on the monitor, the grainy image becoming even more distorted. And then, for a fleeting moment, I saw it clearly. A pale, skeletal hand, dragging itself across the moss-covered ground. It wasn't tapping this time. It was crawling, slowly, deliberately, towards the ancient oak tree. The weeping started again then, faint at first, carried on the night air, but growing steadily louder, more anguished. I stared at the monitor, frozen in terror. The crawling hand, the weeping woman, they were connected. I didn't know how, but I knew it. I had to get out. I couldn't stay here any longer. This wasn't just a job. It was a nightmare. I stood up, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grip the edge of the desk. I grabbed my jacket and my backpack, my physics textbooks feeling heavy and useless in my hands. As I reached for the office door, I heard a soft tapping sound. It was coming from the window. Slowly, hesitantly, I turned my head. Pressed against the glass, its pale fingers leaving faint, greasy marks, was the hand. It wasn't crawling anymore. It had found me. My scream was trapped in my throat, a silent explosion of pure terror. The hand on the window, it was real. It was here. My mind, stripped of all its scientific rationalizations, finally surrendered to the impossible. This wasn't stress. This wasn't imagination. This was something else. Something ancient, something malevolent, something that had no place in the world of the living. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, each tap a chilling punctuation mark in the silent horror of the office. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the hand, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then, the fingers began to curl inwards, pressing against the glass, just like they had on the tombstone. A low scraping sound filled the small office, the sound of bone on glass, a sound that made my teeth ache. Panic seized me. I had to get out. Now. I fumbled behind me for the doorknob, my fingers slick with sweat. My eyes never left the hand on the window. It seemed to be growing paler, more translucent, as if it were trying to seep through the glass. Finally, my hand closed around the cold metal of the doorknob. I twisted it frantically and yanked the door open. The cemetery air hit me like a physical blow, cold and heavy, carrying the faint, sickly sweet scent of lilies. The weeping was louder now, a mournful wail that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. Without a second thought, I bolted. I didn't grab my jacket, didn't look back for my dropped flashlight. My only instinct was to put as much distance as possible between myself and the office, between myself and the tapping hand pressed against the window. I ran blindly through the rows of silent headstones, stumbling over unseen plots, my lungs burning with each desperate breath. The weeping followed me, a relentless, sorrowful sound that clawed at my sanity. I imagined the pale hand detaching from the glass, crawling, reaching, its skeletal fingers scrabbling over the damp earth. The distant glow of the cemetery gates was my only guide, a faint promise of the world beyond this silent city of the dead. I ran towards it with a desperate, primal urgency I never knew I possessed. Finally, I burst through the wrought iron gates, not stopping until I was well out onto the deserted road, the cold asphalt a welcome contrast to the soft, yielding earth of the graveyard. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, the sound of my own ragged breathing the only thing that drowned out the phantom taps and the mournful wails. I ran until my legs screamed in protest, until my chest ached, until the lights of the Umbra College campus appeared in the distance, a beacon of normalcy in the terrifying reality I had just fled. I didn't go back to the cemetery. Not the next night, not ever. I didn't call Mr. Abernathy. I didn't collect my last paycheck. The memory of the eyes, the hand, and the weeping woman was enough to ensure that. I quit college a few weeks later. Engineering suddenly seemed insignificant, a distant dream overshadowed by the tangible horror I had experienced. I couldn't focus, couldn't sleep. The silence of my dorm room was constantly broken by the phantom taps, the darkness haunted by pale, skeletal fingers. I moved back home, a shadow of my former pragmatic self. I told my parents I'd had a bad experience at my job, leaving out the details that would surely land me in therapy. I never spoke of what happened in Iron Gate Cemetery. Sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet, I still hear it. Faint, rhythmic tapping. And I know with a chilling certainty that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. The grave shift was over, but the night, for me, would never truly end.
Mark's harrowing experience within the silent gates of that cemetery serves as a stark reminder that the world we perceive, the reality we so confidently navigate, might be far more fragile than we often care to believe. We rely on our senses, on the established laws of nature, to provide a framework for our existence. But what happens when those frameworks begin to crack, when we encounter phenomena that stubbornly refuse to fit into our neat, logical boxes? Think about the sheer impossibility of what Mark witnessed. Eyes burning in the darkness of a locked mausoleum. A disembodied hand, tapping with eerie precision on a cold tombstone, later crawling with a life of its own. And a figure radiating profound sorrow, a sorrow so palpable it felt like the very air was weeping. These aren't just scary images, they are fundamental challenges to our understanding of life, death, and the boundaries between them. Mark's initial skepticism mirrors our own inherent desire for rational explanations. We seek comfort in the tangible, the verifiable. Yet, his escalating terror highlights the unsettling truth that sometimes, the universe presents us with experiences that defy easy categorization. It forces us to consider the possibility that there are realms, dimensions, or energies that exist just beyond the reach of our everyday senses, occasionally brushing against our reality in ways that can be both terrifying and profoundly unsettling. Consider the countless tales, the folklore and legends that speak of spirits, of hauntings, of things that go bump in the night. Could these stories, passed down through generations, hold echoes of genuine encounters with the unseen? Could they be glimpses into a reality that exists parallel to our own, a reality where the rules we understand no longer apply? Mark's story, whether a purely psychological experience or something more, taps into this deep-seated human fascination with the unknown, with the possibility that death is not necessarily the end, and that some echoes of the past might linger in the places they once knew. Perhaps the universe holds mysteries far stranger and more profound than we can currently fathom, and sometimes, the quietest places hold the loudest secrets. Thank you for watching. Sweet dreams and sleep tight if you can. Hey, horror fans. If you enjoyed our chilling tale and want to keep the spine-tingling stories coming, don't forget to hit that like button. Your support keeps the darkness alive. Share this video with your friends. Let's spread the fear together. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a hair-raising moment. Join our community of thrill seekers and prepare for more eerie adventures. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay scared.